right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Olin Giles with Radical Truth, and I'm just so excited about our guest that we have with us today. But before we bring him on, I just want to remind you that we have lots and lots of incredible resources at the website, radicaltruth.net. At Radical Truth, we proclaim the truth, share the gospel, and expose Islam. So glad that you're with us here today. And again, I'm super excited about our guest, Dave Glander. He's going to share with us a little bit about the Shroud of Turin. And go ahead and bring him on. Dave, how are you, brother? Thank you so much.
Awesome, my friend. I'm going to mute you because now I got you on YouTube too. I figured I might as well go ahead and share this on my Facebook after I saw it. So
Yeah,
I'm looking this way for a second because I figured let me
that's okay.
On Facebook. Why not? I didn't know you were going live with it. That's really cool.
Just glad to have you on here today, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I know if you're like me, you're juggling a lot of ministry activities, and it's just a lot of times it's just hard to figure out how you should spend your time. But I'm grateful that that you're here with us, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say about the Shroud of Turin. But before you get into your presentation, maybe you could, as we talked beforehand, just take a couple of minutes and share about your ministry, what you do, who you are, and we'll get into it.
All right. So I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I went to public school in Connecticut, and they told me that Darwin had it all figured out. We were a great big cosmic accident from two stars colliding together. And when you grow up in that environment, you don't have where do you find hope? Where do you find peace? Where do you find joy? You know what I mean? So growing up an atheist, I didn't really necessarily realize I was an atheist until I moved to Georgia in the Bible Belt. And that's when I realized that I don't like Christians at all. These people drive me nuts. And so I spent several years still in Georgia, but I spent several years living here picking on Christians, if you will. Like if I quickly realized after I moved to the Bible Belt that Christians could not defend why they believe what they believe. They just had this. To me, it was like there was a big giant sign outside the church door saying, check your brains here before you before you enter our facility. And so so it wasn't until making a really long story short, but it wasn't until several years after that my mom died of cancer. It was just a really dark time in my life. And again, if you don't have God, if there is no God, where do you find hope? Where do you find peace in the midst of a time like that? And so I had been doing drugs since I was 6 years old. Again, long story, but by the time my mom died, I was just at the end of my rope, and I ended up hooked on meth for about, I don't know, it was 3+ years. So much of that, Olin, is just so foggy. You know what I mean? Like it feels like it was a whole nother lifetime away, and like it's just, it's been 20 something years, and it's all foggy. But there was just this methamphetamine, crystal meth addiction that just took over. And by the time I came to the Lord, I was maybe 110 pounds. I had abandoned my wife and son at the time, and was living in a dead man's estate in the corner of a room on some couch cushions. So I was basically living as a homeless guy, but it was by choice, because I was so down and out and depressed and full of anxiety and suicidal that I felt it was best that I just leave the house. So my wife and I are still married. My son has now just made me a grandfather back in November. So God has restored all things. But at that time, it was just a real dark place. But I'd come home one night and back to where my wife and my son still were. And I began to, she was reading this book called Knowing Jesus Personally, and the book drove me nuts. I still have that book.
Oh, sounds like the Lord has brought you a long ways.
This book was the book, and it's a Billy Graham library. And she was reading this thing, and it was driving me nuts because, again, I thought, what an idiot. What are you doing reading this book about this figment of your imagination named Jesus? And so I began mocking Christianity. I began mocking her. And here I am, a 110-pound meth addict who's abandoned her, and I'm making fun of her for reading a book about Jesus. And so anyways, long story short, I cried out to God that night and said, if you're God, do something about it. And that was 20+ years ago. And here I am today, staunch defender of the Christian faith. I'm in full-time ministry with Reasons for Hope. You can check out our ministry. It's rforh.com. And I run youth camps. I've been running youth camps, apologetics-driven youth camps for 11 years now. You can go to equipretreat.org and find out all you can find out. We're one of America's only, that I'm aware of, week-long apologetic summer camps where like we still have the whole experience where it's kumbaya at night with s'mores and zip lines and rock walls and gaga balls and volleyballs and all those. But Olin, I was like, kids are going to camp. We have an active audience.
Yeah.
You're going to go, right? How do we take camp and modify camp to the point where when they're leaving with tools in their chest? And so that's what we started doing. And that was because my son was going to camp, and 3 days later he'd come home and I'd be like, what'd you get? And he'd be like, you know, and then all of a sudden the Jesus high was gone. And it was like he had never gone. And I got kind of frustrated with camp, 11 years ago, I guess 12, I started planning it, but I got frustrated. Like, we've got to do something better with camp. Like I said, we have an active audience. How do we transform their lives while we have them? And so we sit them down 18 times in 6 days with nationally recognized apologists, teachers that I've aligned myself with. And we give them the tools that's needed for them to stand bold in their faith. And so I do that. I write books. I'm the host of a TV show called Glad You Asked, which we're about to start filming season 2. So if you have any questions that you want to get highlighted on a TV show, go to rforh.com. That's our website for Reasons for Hope. So rforh.com/GYA for the short for Glad You Asked. I guess we just like letters here at Reasons for Hope. We just shorten everything up. rforh.com/GYA, and you can submit your question and maybe we'll get you highlighted on the show. So that's kind of how I got here and what I'm doing now.
Well, what an incredible testimony. And I can tell you, I've watched the television program. What a great job you guys do. It's it's not boring. It's not, a lot of people, I think they think of apologetics and it's just this information overload, but what you guys do on the television program, Glad You Asked, is very much captivating, and it gives the information, but I think it does it in a way that is just very productive, and I want to say entertaining, but it is. And,
it's a funny word, that word in the Christian circles, because everybody thinks that you should just you can't be entertaining,
Right.
And I get youth coming up to me all the time. They're like, man, you could be a Christian comedian. And I'm like, I take that as why I take that as a compliment? Because they're listening to every single word I'm saying. Right. And so when I'm sharing the truth of the gospel with them, when I'm sharing the truth of the word, they're hanging on every word I'm saying because I'm just not boring, So thank you for saying that, because that means a lot. That's exactly what we were shooting for, is something a little different to get the information out there that's not just
Yeah. Well, I spent 8 years as a youth pastor, and I was hesitant to say it just because so much of our youth ministries are entertainment driven, but there's no substance, there's no content, and there's no equipping of these young people. It's just totally entertainment driven. So again, you guys in this television program have just the perfect combination of the two, I think. And to God be the glory. I was
going to say, to God be the glory. I thank you for saying that. That means a lot. Yeah. That's you pretty much just did a commercial for us, because that's exactly what we were going for. It's like, I don't, in this season, we've got the same cast is back, but Alex, you live in North Carolina, Alex McFarland.
Yes,
he's actually going to be joining us on the set, as well as our kind of resident PhD. We're going to call him the Doc. So he's great. Alex is funny. When you get him off the scholarly platform, he's a goofball. So he's going to be a good fit for us.
He and his wife both have a wonderful sense of humor, and I love them both.
She is absolutely phenomenal. I love her to death. Yeah, she is definitely the better half on that one.
All right. Well, we could stand here and talk about this all day, but
amen.
I'll let you get into your
all right. I'm gonna
presentation and
I'm gonna kind of I want to say I'm gonna zoom through it, but okay, I'm gonna because there's areas that you can go back and watch this, and we'll see if there's we'll see if we can kind of make more of a we'll go through it and then kind of ask the question, what's the point? You know what I mean? Okay. I've kind of gotten to that point with it where it's like, that let's get to that point at the end. So I'll go through it. And if anybody wants, more information on it or anything like that, they can go to Reasons for Hope app. They can go to YouTube. It's this particular talk is up at least a half dozen places that I'm aware of. So
gotcha.
But I'll hit my screen here, and I can't see you. So if somebody chimes in with a question or something like that, just interrupt me because I can't see the little chat screen or anything like that.
Yeah,
So.
we'll hold the questions till the end.
All right.
And if you have a question, just write it in all caps maybe, or tag me, and we'll try our best to get to those at the end.
Sounds
All right.
good. Well, the Shroud of Turin, the number one thing I usually get is what is it? That's because I'm blessed enough that I've got one of only 5 that were replicas that were recreated in 1978. There was a team of scientists who went to Turin Cathedral in Italy, and they spent 5 days and 5 nights around the clock. That was all the Vatican would give them. So they took shifts and they studied this piece of cloth. It is the most scrutinized ancient artifact of all time. There's nothing even remotely close to comparing it to anything else that's an ancient artifact that's had so many, you call them investigations into it to find out what it is, because it's basically a 14-foot long cloth that's roughly 4 foot wide. It's a single cloth, which is pretty fascinating because it's a first century herringbone pattern that's sewn into there, and so to find a single cloth that large from that point in time is pretty rare in and of itself. But if you look at it, you can see that there's these like lighter marks. They almost look like jagged teeth or something like that. And what those are is that's where in 1932 there was a fire. I'm sorry, 1532 there was a fire in Chambéry, France, and I'll show you that video here in just a minute, where the box that the shroud was in melted down onto the cloth and actually burned the cloth. And so just like Olin, back in our day, you and I are probably close to the same age, or at least somewhere there. Our moms would take and put patches over our knees and our jeans to keep the hole from ripping open more. And that's what happened here is you had the nuns actually cut out the worst of it and then sewed patches back into it to keep the holes from tearing more. And so it's got kind of a symmetrical look to it because of the way that it was burned. So what exactly is the shroud? It's what they proposed that Jesus was put in when he was laid inside the tomb. And now keep in mind, he was never put inside the tomb and properly buried according to Jewish custom. He was put in there very temporarily, and that's why the women were going back on Sunday to anoint the body and do what they were supposed to do according to Jewish custom. For instance, he was never wrapped in the linens the way that Lazarus was. When he said Lazarus come out, and Lazarus had to come out and they had to unbind him like a mummy. Jesus was never prepared for that because of the fact that it was Passover coming, and they wanted to get him down off the cross. And so he was put in the cloth, and then the cloth, you can see he was laid back over top of him, and kind of I kind of joke and I say like a Jesus burrito, and some people are like, should I laugh at that or not? I'm like, it's okay to have a sense of humor and be a Christian. So that's what the shroud is. So this is the fire that happened. Can you hear this volume?
32, Chambéry Cathedral, France. For its safekeeping, the Savoy family puts the shroud in a casket and hides it in a crypt behind a grill with 4 locks, each with a separate key. But on December 15th, a fire blazes through the cathedral. Clergymen frantically search for the 4 keys, but to no avail. Finally, a blacksmith is summoned and manages to free the shroud, but not before the metal casket has started to melt and drip on the folded cloth inside, scarring it forever with burn holes and scorch lines down both sides of the image.
So because the shroud was in that fire, it's like I said, it's kind of like a paper angel. Like if you've ever made paper angel or a paper snowflake or something, and you fold it up and then you cut it, when you unfold it, you have a symmetrical pattern. So that's why when you look at the shroud and you see the patches on it, that's why you kind of see this symmetrical pattern. It's also those scorch marks that are going all the way down. When I talk about how the shroud is still folded to this day, that's why you have that symmetrical lines, shapes going all the way down the entire length of it. But what most people don't see is if you look real close right at the center, you're going to see, and we'll unpack this a little bit more as we get a little bit closer up. But I want to focus on the image on the left. You'll see towards the middle, you'll see a 2 lighter spots, a dark nose, dark mustache. You can see the hairline. follow that down through the chest, and you'll see two arms with the fingers crossed over, and then you follow it all the way down. You'll see the ankles down there. There's this image of a man that's within the cloth. So we've got burn marks, we've got water marks that are very apparent all the way through. We've got scorch marks, we've got blood stains, and we'll have to unpack that towards the end. We've got all these things on the cloth that we can test scientifically, but the image that's on the cloth, that's the mystery. How did that image of a man get on the cloth? And it's also on the backside. If you see the backside of his head, if that graphic wasn't up there, you'd see how it continues to go. But like I said, we'll unpack that a little bit more. But the first thing I need to do is debunk the medieval forgery theory, because so many people have this impression that it was a medieval forgery and somebody in the 12th or 13th century painted this thing, created it in such a way that that they were trying to fool us into thinking that this was his cloth. And so in order to debunk it, we kind of have to set the temperature of technology back then. In 1220 was a tread wheel crane. It's like a big human hamster wheel, basically, where a person would get in, they would walk on the tread, and it would lift up the crane in order to get stones, bricks, and things like that up to a higher point. So it's pretty ingenious, but I mean, that's the technology in 1220 was a hamster wheel with a human inside of it. And then we go over here to this point to 1280, and we've got spectacles, and that was the first time that any sort of glasses or magnifying type thing was invented to help people who couldn't see. So the next time you go, "Where are my spectacles?" you'll just sound a little bit fancier. And then this is my favorite one. In 1498, you've got the bristle toothbrush was invented, and I don't know about you, but I am not brushing my teeth with this thing, because they'd take a bone and clean the bone down. Then they would take the hairs off of a hog's back and tie it to it, and that would be what you would brush your teeth with in 1498. So we can see you've got the human hamster wheel, you've got spectacles, and a hog's hair toothbrush. That's where technology was at. That's not saying that humans were stupid, because I honestly believe Adam and Eve were probably smarter than we are with their perfect genetics. But back in those times, in the medieval times, they were not driving electric cars and all that stuff. We were brushing our teeth with hog hair toothbrush. So I used to go into this, Olin, and say, okay, I need to unpack this even more, and let me tell you why the medieval forgery can be debunked because of radiocarbon dating. But about 2 years ago, this article came out, a newer article that came out that talks about new scientific techniques, dates the Shroud of Turin to around the time of Christ's death and resurrection. And what I like about it is this: they've concluded that they're peer-reviewed research. And what you have to understand, everything that I'm about to share with you has been peer-reviewed. Barry Schwartz is one of the world's leading experts on the Shroud of Turin. He was part of the 1978 team. He's probably the most sought after speaker when it comes to the Shroud of Turin in the world. He often travels to Europe and speaks in massive churches on the evidence for the Shroud of Turin. And he convicted me many years ago. He said, "Look, you don't need any goofy stuff in your talk. The peer-reviewed science stands alone to prove that the Shroud is what it is." So peer-reviewed is going to be something I need you to keep in the back of your mind the entire time we're talking about this. So the peer-reviewed research shows the Holy Shroud is compatible with the hypothesis that is much older than 7 centuries old, the conclusion that was reached in 1988 using carbon dating techniques, and is around 2,000 years. And what I like about this is they actually used an X-ray method of research to determine the age, because I'm a throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to carbon dating. I don't like it. I think it's one of the most fallacious sciences out there. It's riddled with problems. It's riddled with assumptions. It's just bad science. And so I don't like the 88 carbon dating testing that was done, mostly because of the carbon dating. I like this a whole lot better because of the X-ray method, and it shows that the Shroud indeed could go back to the time of Christ, which completely eliminates the medieval theory. But let's look, and here's the question that always comes up. It's like, okay, why is it called the Shroud of Turin? Well, the Shroud of Turin gets its name because it's in the cathedral in Italy called Turin, the Turin Cathedral. So it's called the Shroud of Turin because of where it's kept. But what was it called before it made its way into the Turin Cathedral? And I'm gonna make a case to say that the Mendelian of Edessa is the strongest evidence that we've got And the way that works is there's the whole cloth on the left-hand side. You can see the frontal image of the man on the cloth, and then you can see the back image up top and reverse because of the way he was laying down. You fold the cloth once, you have just the front image. Fold it a second time, you have the torso. Fold it a third time, you have just the head image. And then just like a t-shirt, or you fold the sleeves under themselves to display the artwork on the t-shirt, you would fold it over on either side, displaying just the face work, which is why when the fire came down and interrupted that box that it was in and melted down into there and scorched it, that scorch mark went all the way through, which is why when you unfold it, that line continues all the way through. But basically, the threefold theory that's been put forth is the way that it's stored today. And when you do that, you're going to see this facial image is the main focus of it. So if we continue in the city of Edessa, this is 544 AD. This was long before the 12th, 13th century. And there's this image over the city gate that Edessa is about to be ransacked. It's about to be torn down, burned to the ground. They're about to lose the entire city. Whatever's over the city gate was so important that amidst trying to fight off the enemy from coming in and burning the town down, they went up and saved this thing from being burned. And not only was this worth being saved from being burned, an artist found it so important that they made a piece of artwork like commemorating the moment of salvation of this thing that's hanging over the gate. And if you look, you can see there's this image of a face cloth. We'll go from 544 over to the 10th century, and Abgarus is displaying, again, this facial image that appears to be on a cloth. And you can even see, oddly, how the lines kind of line up and everything else. So it would be a strong case to say that must have been, especially given the city of Edessa, which is where Peter had gone up into in that area when he first started his mission work, that they had taken the Shroud up in that area, and that's where the Shroud was living. So we can go over again. I'm only going to share a couple of these with you because of time, but there's a bunch of these. This is a coin from 693 to 695 AD from Justinian II, and again, that's long before the 12th, 13th century. And this is the coin on the left, and then the Shroud of Turin face on the right. And when you superimpose the two by putting them on top of each other, it's a perfect fit. And now I'm not saying because it's a perfect fit, that means it's the face of Jesus. All I'm saying is the artist who used the Shroud thought that it was the face of Jesus enough that was a good enough example for them to use to commemorate this coin. Just like when we go over to the Mount Sinai area in 550, which again, long before 1300s, you see this picture called the Christ of Pantocrator, and there's this picture. Well, if you go into court and you were arrested last month for stealing a Coca-Cola out of the cooler, but the picture wasn't good. It was pixelated, so they couldn't quite make you out. What they do is they go with points of congruence, like the length of the eyebrows to the tip of your nose, or the eyebrows to the tip of your chin, or from the outside edge of your right eye to the outside edge of your left eye. These are all called points of congruence. Well, when you put the Christ of Pantocrator next to or superimpose with the Shroud of Turin, there's over 200 points of congruence between the icon and the shroud. Well, if you're in a court of law, it's about 12 points of congruence that will convict you of being, 20 points of congruence that will convict you of being the person who was caught on the tape. And so this is convicted 10 times over of being, again, doesn't prove that it's the face of Christ, but it proves that the artist was using the Shroud of Turin as the representation of what they believed must have been the face of Christ. And so history between artwork and coinage and everything else has shown that the Shroud of Turin was a major influence on artwork. Again, Gary Habermas has a talk on this, and he probably spends 30 minutes of his talk on this very aspect, just because there is so many similarities between the Shroud of Turin and artwork for hundreds of years that it must have been. So we're going to get to the nuts and bolts, though, because I like getting onto this. What the image on the shroud? What is it? I honestly have no idea. I couldn't tell you what it is. And usually when I'm standing in front of an audience and I say that, you can see people kind of roll their eyes like, well, why is this guy up here talking if he's presenting on the shroud and he has no idea what this is? And so let me let you hear the experts on it, because these guys have been studying this thing for a long time. Let me let you hear what they say.
And at that point in time, I knew that whatever this was, it wasn't a painting.
Nor is it a drawing. or a photograph, or a scorch mark. So what made the image? After 30 years of intensive analysis, the scientists who examined the shroud still have no idea.
So it's not just my humble opinion that they don't know what it is. They have been studying this thing for a very long time and have absolutely no idea what it is. And because it's not a painting, it's not a picture, it's not a photograph. And here's part of the problems is I'm going to give you just a few what I would call scientific anomalies. Again, this has been all peer reviewed, so this no funny business. This isn't my opinion. This has all been peer reviewed in the scientific community. The image that's of the man, when you see that on the cloth, again, we've got burn marks, water marks, blood marks, all this stuff. We've got pollens, we've got residue from different stonework. There's all this stuff that can be tested. The image cannot be tested because the image is only on the first 2 microfibers of a single thread. Okay, now wrap your mind around this. If you've ever tried to thread a needle, you got to lick the needle, or don't lick the needle, that'd be bad. You got to lick the thread, and then you go to stick the thread through the eye of the needle, and you get it and you pull it through, and half the thread stays behind. That's because one single thread that makes up fabric is composed of 70 to 120 fibers. That's as thin as the outer wall of a soap bubble. Okay, that's how thin that thing is. The image that's making up the man's image is on the first 2 microfibers of one single thread. It would be absolutely amazing if it was on the first 2 threads, but it's not. It's on the first 2 microfibers of a thread. And that picture on the top left, that is Barry told me, he's the one who snapped that picture. He said, I ran around the table because I wanted to see the expression on their face, because for the first time just like the nuns sewed patches in to keep the cloth from ripping, to keep the rigidity of the cloth so it could maintain its ability to stand out when they would display it. They sewed another cloth along the entire backside of it to make it more rigid. This was the first time they were separating that back cloth from the shroud to see what's on the other side. And when they got to the other side, the image is not on the other side of the cloth. It's only on one side of the cloth. Now, what makes this an impossibility is if you had oils, pigments, paints, dyes, resins, powders, anything that you would use to create an artwork or a painting, as soon as the brush touches the cloth, just like the water, the blood, the scorch marks, it's gonna stain its way all the way through the entire cloth. It's not going to remain on the first 2 microfibers of a single thread. There's, technically speaking, we still have no abilities at all to put some sort of a residue on the first 2 microfibers of a single thread. So going back to the hamster wheel with a human in it and the spectacles and the hog's hair toothbrush, you're telling me, 1300s where that technology was, somehow somebody figured out how to not use, because there's no paints, powders, pigments, oils, dyes. Like I said, we've looked for them. There's nothing on there. And so whatever the residue isn't a medium we would use, and it's only on the first 2 microfibers. So that's the first scientific anomaly, is how in the world could you possibly even do that? If somebody could replicate this, they would have years ago. And the problem with it is nobody can come close to replicating what the shroud is. So the next thing that's really cool, and this is, I hate teaching this to youth because they have no idea what these things are. Remember the photo negatives and all the lights and darks are reversed. So I pull this out and I'm like, have you ever looked at grandma's or mom and dad's pictures, and in the little front pocket there's these negative? That's a photo negative, and when you hold it up to the light, everything looks really weird because everything is in a negative format. So when we go back over to the shroud on the left, that's a positive picture of what the shroud looks like. That's positively, when you look at the shroud, that's what you see, okay, with your natural eye. On the right, Segunda Pia back in 1898 took the first picture of the shroud. And when he got back to his dark room, I would have loved to have been in there with him, because when he developed the image into a photo negative, which is the first start to making old time pictures come to life, it turned into a photo positive. So the image on the right is actually the negative image of the image on the left, but the image on the right turns into a photo positive, which means the image on the left started out as a negative. And I know that's like, what in the world is this guy talking about? That's why I always joke, and I'm like, if we can get past this point of the presentation, it's all downhill from here, because trying to wrap your mind around that, on the left is actually the positive image that's in negative format, causing the negative format to turn positive. And again, hamster wheel, hog's hair, toothbrush, you're going to tell me that somebody was able to put some sort of residue on the first two microfibers of a single thread that actually is in negative format, when conceptually, how in the world, if I was to hire somebody back in 1290 and say, hey, Olin, I need you to make me this painting, but you can't use any paints, powders, pigments, oils, dyes, resins, powders, or any other medium because you can't get it on anything but the first two microfibers, and I need you to do it in a negative format, so that way in 1898, when Segundo Villa takes a picture of it, he's going to trip everybody out because it's going to turn into a positive format. You're going to be like, what's a negative? You see, until the camera was invented, conceptually, we had no idea of putting a framework on what a negative is in the first place. So how could somebody have done this thing in a negative format when in reality negative format wasn't even a thing? So that's really cool. When you look at the whole shroud, you can see the actual shroud on the left hand side. That's the shroud in the negative format on the right hand side. And then when you blow up just the frontal image, you can actually see a very well detailed picture. Now you can see the fingers, you can see the arms, you can see the facial structure, you can see the legs, the knees, you can see, I wish I was there in front of you where I could point to things, but if you'll notice, the blood on the arms is running the length of the arms. Why is it running the length of the arms? Because if his arms are in crucified position and the blood is running down the wrist wounds, the majority of the blood is going to be running down the length of the arm and drying in that way. And you can see on the wrist wound where that spike would have gone through, and you can even go all the way down to the ankles, maybe come up about a 3/4 of an inch off your screen. You'll see this white blob. That is the ankle portion where the spike went through. So there's a lot. The shroud that I have was part of a 1982 symposium that was held in Atlanta at the Omni, which is no longer even there anymore. But it was on display there, and people were coming to Atlanta from around the world for a month talking about all the scientific information that was there back in 1982. And so if you can imagine, that was only 4 years after the 1978 excursion, how much more science we could talk about now. This talk could literally be 3 weeks long, and you could still, if you want, down at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that Stera ink. That is, if you go to shroud.com, Barry Schwartz has put together Stera ink, and that is the largest collection of information. It would take you a lifetime to sort through how much information there is on the Shroud of Turin. So this is where for me it starts to get really good. So a couple of the scientists that were a part of the 1978 Shroud of Turin research project, the STURP team, were NASA scientists, and so I don't know if they just happened to be standing next to the machine one day, or I don't know what made them decide to do it, but they decided to take a picture of the shroud and put it inside what's known as a VP8 analyzer. And that was a 1960s machine that was designed to take photographs from satellites that would take a picture of the moon or Mars. This was long before we could send a rover up to Mars and get real quality pictures of what Mars looks like. Excuse me. They would take these specially made photographs and put it into this VP8 analyzer, and it would spit out a topographical map of what that looked like. So we could tell, does Mars have craters? Does it have mountains? What does the surface of Mars look like? And we could tell because of this VP8 analyzer, but it's got to be used with very specific photographs that are made for that type of analysis. Because if you just take your picture of you and put it into the VP8 analyzer, it's going to spit out a bunch of gobbledygook because the light to dark contrast ratios are not correct. It's not meant for three-dimensional photography. It's not, the camera didn't take it that way. It's not going to read it that way. It's going to be a bunch of blurry stuff. But when you put the shroud, now listen to this, by the time this airs, this is actually one of the only shows that I like on History Channel. It's called The Real Face of Jesus, and they do a pretty good job of representing the true science, trying to figure out what this thing is. But by the time that I saw this show, I was a quote unquote expert on the shroud, and I want you to hear what this guy says. Now, when you hear what he says, keep in mind that the image is superficial. It's only on the first two microfibers of a single thread. So when he says what he's about to say, keep in mind that the image, superficial, means it doesn't really exist. You know, when we think of a superficial person, they wear their happy face, and then when they turn the corner, they start screaming and yelling. The screaming and yelling is the real person. The happy face person is fake. So what I'm saying is, man, when he says this, keep in mind that the image really doesn't exist. Now listen to what he says.
When you look at the shroud, you have the impression that it's a picture, but it's not a picture at all. It's a database of information.
And I'm sitting there like, it's a database of information. That's just insane. But when you put the shroud into the VP8 analyzer, you can see instead of spitting out gobbledygook, it actually spits out a three-dimensional image of the man to the point where they've been able to extract the information. And on the real face of Jesus, you'll see them do this. They can actually pull out a pretty darn good illustration of what his facial features would be like, and his right eye is nearly swollen shut from being hit in the face so many times, and just it's a go watch the real face of Jesus. It'll really shine some light on it. But it also, Olin, what it does is it shines some light on the fact that he was, as the Bible says, he was nothing that we should look at him and go, wow, because he looks just like a rugged Middle Eastern first century Jewish carpenter, and that's what it is. So here's this is about let's see, not last Easter, 2 Easters ago, I was presenting, and right before I got up there, somebody sent me this, and I died laughing because I was like, this is really what it comes down to. The $1 million challenge. If the Shroud of Turin is a forgery, show how it was done. This guy's got $1 million on the line. If anybody can recreate it, you can be a millionaire overnight. All you got to do is recreate the Shroud. But you've got to recreate the Shroud with all of its scientific anomalies, and you've got to get it on the first 2 microfibers. It's got to be in negative format. It's got to have 3-dimensional qualities. All of those different things have to be a part of it. And this guy knows that. And so he put $1 million on the line and said, okay, if you can make it, go for it. So I just found that really funny because, all right, so let's start to land the plane. What could have discolored the image on the cloth? That's where it gets to be really good. This what I'm sharing with you, I believe, is maybe 4 or 5 years old now. It's relatively new. Mark Antonacci was the first one who was beginning research on this, and the Italian scientists kind of beat him out on the whole thing. So listen to what they say.
The most popular theory of image formation on the Shroud today is that of some form of energy or radiation being transmitted from the body enshrouded in the cloth to the cloth itself.
Is it possible that during the resurrection, Christ's body turned to light, giving off the radiation which imprinted his image on the shroud?
See, and I would say, is it possible? I don't think it's just possible. I think it's actually scriptural, because when you think of Moses coming down off the mountain and his face was so illuminated from the inside out that they were like, dude, put something over your face. I'm not sure if that was Hebrew, that dude, but they were like, dude, put something over your face, like cover yourself up. Like he was illuminated from the inside out. What about the Mount of Transfiguration? Again, Old Testament, New Testament, we've got Jesus going up to the Mount of Transfiguration, and Moses and Elijah looks him over and says, yep, you're the one, because he had illuminated literally from the inside out. So we have 2 illustrations through scripture that talk about that very thing. And so this is what started it, because the image on the left is that's the shroud on the left, and then on the right is the skull, and you can see that you can actually see the teeth coming around, and see that the teeth pattern going down through the actual jawbone. You see on the right there's a hand, and for many years people were like, oh, this forger got it wrong. They don't know anatomy because the fingers are way too long. That's how we know this is not the real thing. So you see on the bottom picture, you'll see the skeletal hand laid over top, superimposed over top of a close-up of the Shroud of Turin hand. And if it's an X-ray image of sorts, then the best explanation is that it's correct, because of the fact that the fingers don't stop where the skin stops. They go way back into the hand bone, making the fingers the actual correct length. And then what's fascinating to me is you'll notice the man on the shroud has no thumbs. Well, if you'll take your hand and you push your thumb right in the middle, like right at the base of the wrist where your wrist meets your arm, and you push right at the base, right in the middle, you're going to feel a nerve that runs up into your thumb, and it's called the median nerve, and that is between the 2 bones there that are called the space of destot. Well, when they put the spike in, they wouldn't have put it in the middle of the hand, because as we see by that hand X-ray, the skin would have ripped, and the crucified person would have literally fallen off the cross. So they went right back behind the wrist bone, right back behind the hand and the wrist bone, between that space of death dot, and drove a 1/2-inch spike straight through there. But when they did, it split the median nerve, and when it split the median nerve, just like kind of a snail, the reason why a snail can stay closed is because of the muscles holding it closed. Whenever you find a dead snail, or not a snail, a shell on the beach, you see that it's been open because it's lost its muscular power to maintain the clam staying closed. When that median nerve gets split, it loses its muscular power to hold the thumb in place, so your thumb collapses on itself. So even down to the fact that the man of the shroud has no thumbs is representation of a crucified victim. So if somebody did fake this thing back in 1200s, not only would they have had to do it on the first 2 single microfibers of a single thread in a negative format with 3-dimensional qualities that are now displaying X-ray qualities, but they would have had to have thought about, hey, we need to make sure there's no thumbs in order to be historically accurate. So it just becomes, as you can tell, I've gotten a little bit more transparent on where I'm at with it. And let me say, my faith doesn't rest in this thing. If this isn't the shroud of Jesus, my faith in the resurrection is based on historical evidences. And so my faith in the resurrection remains based on historical evidences alone. This just seems to be a very cool thing, which we'll talk about that here in just a minute. So I want to finalize this X-ray thing with the follow-up news report that came out of Italy. Listen to what they say.
The Telegraph reports the scientists say the technology that would have been needed to create the marks on the shroud simply was not available in medieval times. They concluded that the exact shade, texture, and depth of the imprints on the cloth could only be produced with the aid of ultraviolet lasers, technology that was clearly not available in medieval times. In case there was any doubt about the preternatural degree of energy needed to make such distinct marks, the report spells it out. This degree of power cannot be reproduced by any normal UV source built to date.
So we can send rovers to Mars. We can clone you if you really want to. It's illegal, but we could clone you because we have the science to do it. But we still don't have the technology to create a machine that would have the power necessary to create a preternatural radiometric or radiological event that would produce these things. So I just get to the point where I'm like, could it be a medieval forgery? There's no way. There's no way the science of that time could support that. So that begs the question, is it Jesus? And I'll never forget the first time I ever talked with Gary Habermas, which pray for him because he is on 7,000 or 8,000 pages of his magnum opus. His first volume just published about 4.5 weeks ago. And he is rocking that thing out. So pray for him, because that is a man with more knowledge on the resurrection than anybody that I've ever met before. But anyways, first time I ever talked to him, he said, "This is easy, absolutely, yeah." I'm thinking to myself, like, I know you're Gary Habermas and all, but man, you're making a giant claim right here. And he goes, "No, you got to understand the uniqueness of the crucifixion of Jesus was totally different than everything else. If you're going to teach a Sunday school class on Roman crucifixion, don't use the gospel accounts, because what happened to Jesus was completely unique." You see, Romans were brutal, man. They loved torture. They loved crucifixion. And so they documented it. There was first century attestation documented from the different torture methods that would work better than the others, and how many victims never even made it up to the proverbial cross. They would die right there on the whipping post. Like, they were not only good at what they did, at experts at torture, but they documented it. He said, so we have thousands of written cases of first century Roman crucifixion. Not a single one of them has the three things that Jesus had, which were the spear wound, the crown of thorns, and the non-broken legs. And so we go to the first one, and you can see the spear wound right here, and you can see it's actually on his right hand side. That looks like his left, but you got to remember, when the cloth is pulled out, it's a mirror image. So you've got this spear wound, because it said when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they didn't break his leg, so they shoved a spear in there. So we can see that there is no break. We know that because it's an X-ray. We can see that on his nose, there is a very solid crack on his nose, which does not violate scripture, where it says not a bone will be broken, back in the prophecies, the Old Testament, about this, because the nose is cartilage. I mean, whenever you find a skull, you don't find a nose with it. You find a big old hole there, because your nose isn't bone that can be preserved. It's cartilage that deteriorates. But the legs, we don't see a single break in them whatsoever. And then the crown of thorns is very apparent. That's an actual spear that I have from first century Rome, up there on the top right, and that is a very spear that they are saying is the one that would have penetrated into his side. Cool little scenario with that. When John said the water and blood, that's because the heart cavity was beginning to fill with water, trying to protect the heart. And so we now know in medical technology that when the spear went and penetrated that, the first thing comes out is water and then blood, because the water surrounding the heart. John couldn't have known that. Is my point. There's no way first century John could have known that, but that's what he penned. That's why I love the scriptures on how accurate they get things. But crown of thorns is the third thing that was very unique. The non-broken legs, the spear wound, crown of thorns. The man of the shroud of Turin has all three of them. You can see the crown marks going all the way around, the spear wound, and the legs. So Gary Habermas was like, if you're trying to connect this to whether or not it's Jesus's or not, it's actually easy, because there's only one written case in all of history that documents a crown of thorns, spear wound, excuse me, and the non-broken legs, which is why he said, if you're teaching a Sunday school or a seminary class or a history class, if you want to teach about the accuracy of Roman crucifixion, don't use the gospel accounts, because what was written about Jesus was very unique, unlike any other thing. So the one account we have matches the shroud, the man of the shroud, and I find that pretty fascinating. So John immediately believed, and this I find very interesting, because it says, finally the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. That's John chapter 20 verse 8. John chapter 20 verse 9 says they still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. And so I'm looking at this text going, okay, John 28 says he saw and believed. 29 says he still didn't understand. This is Daveology 101. This is not theology. This is not doctrine. This is just me saying what I think maybe this means. We know the image on the shroud is getting lighter. It's fading as its entropy is affecting the shroud. It's my belief that the shroud was probably a lot darker in image when they first picked it up. And so John goes in, he sees the shroud laying on the stone. He opens it up to go like, where did the body go? And he opens it up because, keep in mind, on his end, he doesn't see anything. There's no image because that image is only on one side. He opens the thing up, and all of a sudden there's this image of Jesus' body on the entire cloth. That's what caused him to have kind of like Elizabeth's womb when Mary walked in the room and John jumped in her womb at the presence of Christ. I think something in John just kind of leapt and was like, whoa, like a moment of belief. He still didn't get it yet, but there was this moment of belief when he saw that. And so I think he folded that thing up, handed it to Peter. Peter took it over into Europe, which is why it shows up where it does, and Savoy and everywhere else. So anyway, this is my closing. This is the amazing part. So John and Peter believe, but Barry believed because of the red blood. Now, you've heard me mention Barry several times, and Barry's a little fascinating to me because here's the thing about Barry. Barry's a Jew. Barry Schwartz is a Jewish man. He's secular Jewish. He's not even Orthodox Jewish. He doesn't believe in Jesus Messiah. He doesn't. His thing is he's like, man, I don't care if people get saved or not. I have no horse in this race. Like when he presents on the shroud, he's not doing it for any other reason than in 1978 he was invited to go study this thing, and for 30 years he couldn't avoid the facts that supported the shroud being that of Jesus, except when he and Alan Adler, who was another Jewish man, part of the team, walked in the room in 78, both of them turned the corner, saw the shroud for the first time, and said, it's a fake. And I said, why did you say that? And he goes, because their blood was still red. And everybody knows that blood, when it dries, coagulates and hits the air and oxidizes, it's going to oxidize outside the body, and it's going to turn almost black. It's so dark brown, dark red that it's almost black. So this blood was still red. There's no way that this shroud could be authentic because of the red blood. But he said for 30 years, everything kept pointing back to, all the peer-reviewed evidence kept pointing back to the authenticity of the shroud being that of Jesus of Nazareth, right? Now, you notice I didn't say Jesus Christ because he says Jesus of Nazareth because he doesn't believe that. And so I asked him, I said, well, then why are you such a staunch supporter of it? And he goes, let me tell you what happened. He goes, Alan Adler, who was the scientist that was walking side by side with him into the room back in 78, he goes over and he's doing some research at a body farm, and a body farm is where you can dedicate your body or donate your body to science. And what they'll do is they'll take a decomposing body and they'll put it in a bed or under a tree or in a bathtub or in the woods, different scenario, in the snow and in the heat. And what they'll do is they'll document moment by moment the breakdown process of the body's decomposition, excuse me, in order that, so if an investigator shows up and finds a body laying under a tree, they can do reverse forensics and say, okay, according to the body's decomposition process, here's where it's at. We know this body's been here for 2 weeks, 2 days, and two hours. And then they can do the math and go, okay, John Doe was killed 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 hours ago. Who was he with? And they can try and solve the crime based off of the reverse forensics. Well, here's what Alan Adler noticed within these studies: when a body is brutally maimed badly to the point where the victim can't produce blood fast enough to replace what's being taken out. That's why when you go and donate blood, you can only donate so much, because if you donate too much, you're going to die. The body can only reproduce it so fast. When a victim is so brutally mangled or tortured or anything like that, decapitation, loss of limb, when the blood loss is so much, the victim that's now deceased, when they're put on a bed and they're watching what's happening, what's actually coming out of their wounds isn't blood anymore. It's called bilirubin. And bilirubin is a substance that comes out of the liver. And what the body's trying to do is, the body's a cool thing. God's made us to repair ourselves. So when the body runs out of blood, the heart goes, okay, I've got to have something. It sends signals down through the body, and the body's like, we got to put something back up through here in order to keep life, because blood is a life source to the flesh. And so it goes down through the liver, pulls up bilirubin, and starts to pump this serum called bilirubin through the veins. So what drains out of the actual wounds onto any of the surfaces where this body is decomposing isn't exactly blood anymore. It's bilirubin. Well, bilirubin is extremely high in iron. When iron dries, it dries rusty red. And so rusty red color is there for 2 days after the body's there, 2 weeks after the body's there, 2 years or 2,000 years. It doesn't matter how long it is, because what's actually dried on the cloth isn't exactly, it's a portion of blood mixed with bilirubin that's high in iron. And that iron dries a rusty red, keeping its red color. And so I'm on the phone with Barry. He's not a believer. And I'm like, I got to get off the phone, because, man, it kicked my butt. I'm not going to lie. Let's just say, for sake of argument, that the shroud is not Jesus's. Let's just say for now it's not Jesus's. It doesn't change what he went through going to that cross, because Roman crucifixion was absolutely brutal. And when you flip to the Old Testament, it says that the blood is not supposed to be left inside of the sacrifice, that is to be bled completely out. And then we know that Jesus is called God, man in the flesh, right? He's also God, man in the flesh, depending on blood in order for blood to be the life source to the flesh. So for him to be the sacrifice that went to the cross means that he had to be completely bled out 100%. And the day that hit me, I had never really thought about the crucifixion that way. I knew it was, I saw the Passion of the Christ. I had done the medical studies, but it never really hit me that in order for him to be the once for all permanent acceptable sacrifice, he had to be completely bled out, which would answer why the man of the shroud was bleeding out bilirubin, which stays red for 2,000 years, because he was bled out when by the time he was laid in that cloth, he had no blood left coming out. What hit me just as hard as can be, he said these words, "It is finished." And now I've heard a lot of good sermons on what that means. I've heard a lot of good ones, but on that day, what that meant to me was him looking up to the Father and saying, "Father, I have drained every last drop of blood in my body has been drained for the payment of these sins. It is finished." And he took his last breath and he died. And it hit me so hard that, man, he didn't go 90% of the way. He didn't go 95%. He didn't go 98.7%. You don't bleed out until you've gone 100% of the way. And he was alive up until the last drop came out, which means suffering and the pain that he went through for me. And let me show you who he died for. That guy. Little side note. You can go to our Facebook page, Reasons for Hope, and I wrote a blog. I write about 4 a year for Reasons for Hope. We take turns, and there's all this nonsense going on about he gets us commercials, and I'll let you read the blog for the totality of it. I like those commercials. And the reason why is because, man, it's pre-evangelism. It's saying, look, you don't have to do anything for Jesus to come and wash your feet. Jesus washed the feet of his own murderer, Judas, before Judas sold him out for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus washed the feet of the one who was going to hand him over to die. Washed us. He didn't ask him to clean up. And that guy that you see sitting there, like, I conceptually know that's me, but I don't look anything like that anymore. I mean, there is nothing. My face is shrunk in. There's death in my eyes. I mean, that guy is dead. That's who Jesus came and washed my feet. I in that commercial for the Super Bowl, there's a drug addicted girl sitting on the floor and there's a lady washing her feet. That was me. And I needed that in order to come to him before I can understand what repentance was. You see, repentance is a granted gift from God. We have to make the conscious choice to repent. That's what work out your salvation with fear and trembling. But salvation, according to the scriptures, is God. We may pray that God might grant them repentance. It's something that only the Holy Spirit can accomplish. And so everybody who's up in arms about this, he gets us, doesn't share the whole gospel. I'm like, you know what? Here's my closing challenge in the blog. I said, what if the commercial works and a drug addict decides he wants to go to your church on Sunday morning and experience this Jesus who on John 3:17, we always quote John 3:16. John 3:17 says, God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but that through him the world might be saved. Jesus didn't come to condemn. And we have all these well-meaning Christians who are out there condemning everybody, saying, oh, they're not worthy of their feet to be washed because this commercial doesn't talk about repentance. And I'm thinking, if they show up, if the queer that's in that one thing, or transvestite, whatever it is, that the man of the cloth is washing his feet, shows up at your church Sunday morning, are you ready to finish the evangelism process and tell them about the goodness of God and cause them repentance from getting them saved? Or are you going to sit there and condemn them? Because see, we have a campaign. It's called One More Matters. And it's a very simple campaign. It's not complicated whatsoever. I'm not going to get into all that because I don't want it to go there. But it's one. Are you after the one? Who's your one? Who's the one that you're praying for? Who's the one that you're going to overlook their sins so that you can? And I'm not saying you can continue walking in your sin. That's what I think these holier than thou Christians are trying to say. It's not about that. It's about showing people the love of Christ and allowing the Holy Spirit to do the work. Because the last time I checked, I can't change anybody. I don't have the power to change. I barely have the power to change. As a matter of fact, I don't have the power to change myself. I have the power to lean on the Holy Spirit to change me. So I say, you know what, man, let's get our focus right and make sure that we're sharing the gospel. And that gospel starts with, hey, no matter where you're at, Christ loves you. And he died for you, and he laid down his life. He didn't give his life 50%. He gave 100%.
All right. Wow. What an absolutely fascinating presentation. Thank you so much, Dave.
Absolutely.
Lots of great material. And I know there's a lot more that you could have said. You shared that. I was hoping we'd have a few questions. So I just wrote down a few of my own. And if you could just answer them briefly.
Yeah. I'm just glad you're still there, because I was like, I haven't gotten a text from him or anything saying that I couldn't see anything. So I was like, I'm just gonna keep talking, hoping he's still there.
You pretty much covered this, but I just think it needs to be emphasized again. And so you can do this real quickly. What I hear you saying is there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that this image has been brushed on there or painted on in any kind of way, right?
Can't be. There's no, to date, there's no way to do that. That's part of the, as soon as, there's been some people who have tried to recreate it, but as soon as they break out in oils, pigments, dyes, powders, resins, they've already violated the very beginning premise of the fact that none of that's been detected on there. I mean, they 3M made a very special tape that was able to go onto the shroud and go down, and they would adhere it to the shroud and then pull it off without hurting the shroud. And there's pollens that are located within one region of Jerusalem, that these 3 different pollens that are located, if you draw a circle around their locations, the center point where all the circles meet is in Jerusalem. There's a limestone powder that's on the bottom of the man's feet that is located only within tombs within the Israel area. And so if it was some sort of European forgery, first of all, how did they get it on the first 2 microfibers of a single thread? But then they went through the process of going to Jerusalem and collecting limestone and pollen to put on the cloth. So, I mean, they've been able to extract even things like pollen and limestone, but they can't extract the residue that's stuck on those first 2 microfibers is not enough to extract it. So, it can't be any sort of artistic medium at all, because it would have penetrated.
Great. You just answered the next 2 questions. All right. Here's another one. And again, you can address it briefly if you'd like. But I remember reading somewhere that there was some kind of indication that rigor mortis had set in. And what is the evidence for that? Have you heard that before?
Well, I think what you're going, let me see.
I thought that's where you were going when you started talking about hands.
Let me put this picture back up again.
Okay.
If you can, look up at the top edge. You're going to see on the top right-hand side and the top left-hand side, you're going to see a lighter piece of cloth. Okay. Do you see that? On the very top side. Now look, and you're going to see a perfect line going down the entire length of that. Do you see that line that's going down there?
Yeah.
That meets up with the edges of those 2 white ones. Okay, I'll pull this back off now. There's 2 theories basically that cloth that's on the top has been sewn onto the cloth. So there's 2 theories. I'll share the first one with you, which is just funny because it's just funny. The nuns who sewed the patches on there had OCD. The man was not centered of the cloth, so they cut about 4 inches off the bottom and sewed it to the top so they could shift the image of the man to be centered, because the nuns had OCD. That's one theory. I think the better theory is those lighter cloths that are on the end, again, are patches that were sewn in there to bring the edges of that 4-inch piece out to the ends of the totality of the cloth. That middle piece that's sewn in all the way across that matches the rest of it. When they took him down off that cross, it was a very quick thing. They had to find a piece of cloth to put him in, and which a piece of cloth like that would have only come from a rich person. So that matches the borrowed tomb, and so when they put him in there again, they didn't have time to prepare the body, but at a minimum, they would have tied the jaw shut, okay, to keep the jaw from opening. They would have tied the wrist together and then put the wrist together on the waist like this in order to keep the arms from flailing up. And then they would have tied around the knees to keep the legs from bowing out. And so when you see the man of the cloth, his arms are like this down at his waist, because he was tied down that way. His legs are in a bent position because that was the beginning of rigor mortis that was starting to set in, but his legs didn't. When you see a cat or a dog or a deer or something laying out in the street, their limbs are straight out, that's rigor mortis. Well, to prevent that, they would have tied that. So I think when it says that the strips of linen, that's I'll get that, because I don't have time to cover everything in a 45-minute talk. But people will ask me about the strips of linen that are in the scriptures, that the face cloth was folded and off to the side, which we'll talk about that in a second. But then there's the strips of linen that were there, and they're like, this isn't a strip, this is a cloth. And I was thinking, okay, hold on. Instead of the OCD theory, what if when they picked everything up, they picked up that strip, it went with it, the nuns sewed it back on to keep the cloth with the strips, but those are the strips that they would have taken and tore it off because they were in a hurry and tied them up, and then there's where the strips of linen came from. So I think that's that top piece. It's about 4 inches, it's about 3.25, 4 inches wide. I think that was them going, how are we going to tie them together here, just take this cloth and rip this edge off of it. Hurry, tie him up. Let's put him in this thing and move on and get the stone rolled in front, because sunset's about to go down. And if you've ever been to Israel, they take that about as serious as you can get, man. Sunset goes down Friday night, it's on. It's game on. So
awesome.
I think that's what that is right there. But that's it. But going back to the face cloth. So the face cloth is called the Sudarium of Oviedo. If you look it up, there's a face cloth called the Sudarium of Oviedo. If you take the face cloth from the Sudarium of Oviedo and you overlay it on top of the Shroud of Turin, the blood marks on the face cloth match the blood marks on the Shroud of Turin perfectly. There's no image on the Sudarium of Oviedo. There's not, like there is with the Shroud of Turin, but that's because just like today, the first thing you do when you have the deceased, at a minimum, you'll cover their face. Hopefully you got a whole cloth, but if at a minimum, you're going to, out of respect for the dead, you're going to cover their face, right? So Jesus comes down off the cross. They cover his face. They carry him over to the tomb. They take the cloth off and set it to the side. Then they tie him up, wrap him up. And so you got three things going on. You got the shroud in totality. You got the strips of linen, and then you've got the face cloth, right? Well, the face cloth doesn't have the image on it because it was taken off of him during the resurrection. Because I think what that image is, I think that's the first second of God saying, breathe. And I think just like the Mount of Transfiguration or Moses, I think a bolt of light just from the inside of Jesus, poof, he came back to life and made a snapshot or an X-ray snapshot. That's my theory on how the image got there. It's best anybody can come up with at the moment, which is just fascinating when you stop and think about that. But the Sudarium doesn't have it because it wasn't on him. However, I love the fact that it says that it was folded. And of course, I know you've heard this story a thousand times, but any viewers who haven't heard it, in Roman tradition, or Jewish tradition rather, when the owner of the table got up, if he left his napkin on the table clumped up, that means that he would be right back. But if he folded it, or I'm sorry, he was done. If he folded it, that means he was coming back. So don't pick up his drink or his food or anything because he's just run to the bathroom or something. The folded napkin means I'll be back. So when you read the scriptures and it says, here's the strips of linen, there's the shroud, and here's this folded face cloth, it's like Jesus pulled the ultimate Arnold Schwarzenegger and said, I'll be back. So.
Amen. Awesome. Well, that's exactly where I was going next. But, it seems, regardless of who this person is, whether it's Jesus or not, we know that this person had a crown of thorns on their head, right? Yeah. Their arms or their hands and their legs were pierced, and there was a spear wound to the side. So, lots and lots of parallels with the scripture.
Well, and the amount of torture, if we learn, so we'll close up shop by saying two things. One, it gives us a really good picture of first century Roman crucifixion, because there's only a couple of spots on this man's body, whoever this is that's on the shroud. There's only a couple of spots where there's not devastating signs of torture. I mean, just blood, wounds everywhere. Interesting little snippet before I go on to the next part, though. He had to have come through the cloth, okay? And like when I said John reached the tomb and pulled it back looking, where is Jesus? But he saw the image there. He had to have come through the cloth, because what happens if you take a wound, right? You got on your hand and you take cloth, you stick it to the wound, the blood dries, right? Just like we have on the cloth. We got dried blood everywhere, right? What happens when you pull that off? It's going to pull the outside of the wound is going to be dead skin all the way around, because that skin immediately starts to die on the outside so that it can repair itself. There would be dead skin stuck to the cloth. If the cloth had been pulled off of him, there'd be dead skin stuck. There's no skin cells anywhere on that entire cloth, which means he had to have come through the cloth like a early picture of the rapture almost. So, again, there's so much to talk. You can spend days and hours talking about it. But my biggest thing is why. I get that. Almost every single time I present, I get the question, what's the point? Here's the point to me. Again, this is just Daveology 101. We live in first 300 years were the most brutal for Christians as far as torture and death and martyrdom, and so I don't think we're there in that period of time. But as far as ridicule, questioning, mocking, just the overall abandonment of the faith, we're not a Christian nation as we once were. We're not a Christian world as we once were. We're living in postmodern thought. We're living in the era of relativism. We're living in the era of left is right, right is left, boy is girl, girl's boy, right is wrong. It's just so. This is the only period of time that we have had the science to scrutinize this thing like this. And the only time that we've had the microscopy, took me hours to learn how to say that word. We didn't have microscopy up until 100 years ago. We couldn't have done the research to find out that it was on the first 2 microfibers of a single thread without microscopy. We couldn't have understood. My ADD's going, so follow with me. It's just like when the 2 witnesses are going to be laying in the streets in Revelation, and it says the whole world will see them. Well, yeah. We're living at a unique point in time where we have we're streaming right now from, you're in North Carolina, I'm in Georgia, and there might be somebody watching from Timbuktu. We're the only generation that can say we can stream that, and yes, the whole world will be able to see it. The 2 bodies laying in the streets being marched through the streets. We're the only generation who can say that, because up until live streaming, that wasn't an option, just like the Shroud. Up until this generation, we're the only generation since 1978 that has been, which I still think that's not that long ago, but might be a kid watching going, 78, was that a real time? But nonetheless, we're the only generation that has been able to scrutinize this thing, and the entire thing keeps going, I came out of that grave. Yes, I raised from the dead. Yes, the resurrection's true. Yeah, so at a time in which we're living of the most scrutinized, rebellious, against Christianity at least, God's like, oh yeah, what say you about this? Because that I think it's just kind of I don't know that God does the whole flicking of the nose to people, but if he did, this would be a take that, It's like you can't walk away and say, oh, there's nothing special about that, because we're the only generation that could. So, but I'll say this: I love when Gary Habermas was getting interviewed by Lee Strobel for A Case for Christ, and he said, Lee said, okay, what's the point? What's the point of the resurrection? And he goes, I'll get to see Debbie again, and that was his former wife who passed away.
Right.
And that's what the resurrection means, is that death has no power over us any longer. The idea of death shouldn't scare anybody. I mean, obviously everybody's like, well, that's a little weird. I hope I don't want to die of cancer. I'd rather die of a heart attack. That sounds much more fun. Or I don't want to die of a bear mauling or something. You know what I mean? Like we can sit there and say, I don't want to die this way or that way. But as far as the actual act of death and life after death, to a Christian, to a believer, that doesn't mean anything, because Jesus raised from the dead. And so that's that's why I think we should always wake up every day with a little smile on our face, a little pep in our step, ready to go get the next one. Who is your one? And you can find out more about who One More Matters by going to our website. Again, it's forh.com. You'll find out everything. We have a free app, and if you haven't downloaded it, you're crazy, because dude, it's a free app. There's not even like in-app sales, unless you go to like the store and buy a shirt or something. There's no in-app sales. It's free. Just go to your app store and type in RFORH, and you'll see a black background with a blue asterisk. And we got full-length teachings. We've got shorts. We've got 60 seconds. All of our debunked videos. If you're not familiar with debunked, debunked is one of our most popular things that we do. And we take worldview and we break them down within 3 to 5 minutes in a very animated fashion, because we live in this culture where everything's going so fast. And so, I mean, you got text and pictures and stuff popping up all over the place as Bubba's narrating it. And so, but yeah, I think there's 28 or 29 debunked that are up there that are meant for you to have in your pocket. I mean, if you're going to carry these stupid things around with you, because they're stupid. The more I walk this out, the more I realize how stupid these things are. If you're going to have it, we want to give you the tools to when you're out in the streets. I can do this quick. I can go boom, Oh, it wants my Face ID right here. And then I go to the app, and I'm in the app already. That's a messaging feature we have. I go to all things debunked. I go to debunked videos, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, tattoos are sinful, debunked. And all of a sudden here I am playing a video on, and you can see the way they are. That how long did that take me? 5 seconds, and now I've got a conversation starter. But you can see how we do them. They're done really, really well, but they're meant to be conversation starters. If you're not comfortable talking about abortion, we have one about abortion that's 5 minutes, and to me makes a slam dunk case for it. So if you're not, anyways, we want to equip you. That's the whole point. We want you to be equipped to be strong in your faith, to stand boldly in this world and do what we've been called to do, which is the Great Commission. So,
well, amen, brother. Thank you again for taking the time to be on, and thank you for
having me.
Yeah, what a blessing it was. And I would encourage anybody listening, if you're looking for somewhere to take your children or your students to a camp, to get in touch with David. Check out his website. Check out everything that he's mentioned here.
EquipRetreat.org. We're already at 50 plus capacity and almost sold out in a couple of them. So don't wait too long, because they're filling. We've got 6 of them this year. And they're filling up really fast.
Well, maybe you could send those links to me if you hang around just a second afterwards, and I'll post those in the description box.
We need to do another episode on Islam. That's how you and I first met. I came by your table at the national conference. Golly, 12 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And I saw you had a book on Islam, and at the time I had just started really digging deep into there. And I don't know who's the Antichrist. Not that you're going to be able to say the name, but do you have an idea of where he comes from?
Well, we know that the spirit of the Antichrist very much fits with Islam. And if you've ever read Joel Richardson's book, The Beast from the East.
Yeah. So I had that theory long before he wrote that book, or at least in publication. And then when he published it, I had to have been one of the first person to buy that book, because I wanted to see what he said about it. Right. And then I'll never forget. What Roxella was his wife, and he's passed away, but massive prophecy teacher. I what is it? Remember Roxella is his wife, and she's just goofy, and he's
it's been so long since I've read that book.
It'll take me a minute, but he forever everybody was saying it's the Roman Antichrist. I was like, no, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. Yeah. And so finally he was sitting there. It was right on the tip of my tongue. He was talking one night, and it was like 2 a.m, and I was watching like a replay of it or something like that. He looks into the camera and goes, I've been wrong all these years. It's Imam al-Mahdi. And I'll never forget, I smacked my wife. She was asleep. I was like, honey, he just said that. So people are starting to come around. But we need to do an episode on that.
Absolutely.
When we first met.
I'd love it. Well, again, brother, thank you so much for being on today. And
thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, appreciate it so much. Did a great job. I wish I could speak as fast as you do. You covered it. You covered it. A lot of material, a lot of ground, very, very quickly. So thank you.
Absolutely. And, if I can ever do anything for you, let me know.
Same here, brother. Same here. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And again, encourage you to go to our website as well, radicaltruth.net. And you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube. Go there and check out our videos, like them, share them. It helps us very much with the algorithm. So please do that. And until next time, thank you again for joining us today.